Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great. This is an energetic bunch. I like that. It's good to hear laughter. It's good to be lighthearted, really, with all that's going on in our nation, in our city, in our state. So to have these moments where we can come together and have conversation, have meaningful dialogue in a peaceful way, in an empowering way, it feels good to the soul. So thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. My name is Franchelle Hart. I'm the executive director for Open Buffalo. Open Buffalo is a community movement for social and economic justice. So when you say that, a lot of people say, well, what in the world does that mean? Those are the big issues. Those large systemic issues that one sector, one organization, one business, one not-for-profit, one activist, one elected official haven't been strong enough to tackle together. So we said, united, we can tackle poverty in our city. We can tackle institutional and systemic racism in our city. But we need everyone involved in this fight, everyone involved in really formulating solutions. And it's the solutions portion that really birthed our community policing service. We knew especially communities of color and young people all across the city were facing tremendous issues with law enforcement. And we have wonderful research capacity in our community. So we know that there's best practices that work all across the country that really transform communities. But we wanted to make sure that whatever policy we supported, it actually was reflective of the city of Buffalo. So we trained about 75 leaders in this community to go out and hit the streets and to collect data from everyday residents all across the city. And we collected over 2,000 surveys from all across the country. Thanks to you all. We had the surveys translated into 4 different languages because we know that it's not just issues in the African American community per se. And we wanted to make sure that we actually had the tools to go to our elected officials and say that this is really what the community is feeling. And we're in the process of tabulating all of that data. Some of the data was released yesterday at our kickoff of our Justice and Opportunity Week. Our Justice and Opportunity Week will be a week-long series in community conversations stemming from know your rights trainings to documentaries on how drug policies disproportionately impact Black and brown communities. So I thank you for joining us this evening. You're certainly in for a treat. So we're gonna just dive right into the program right now. And I'm so excited to invite Drea up for a musical interlude. This sister is back, okay? She is back. I follow her on Instagram. I'm always like, oh, she's my best friend in my head. I love your energy. I love your spirit. So thank you for being with us this evening. And she's going to grace us with some of her talent.
My name is Drea Denor, and I'm very happy to be here to represent the arts community in Buffalo. I have lots of friends who are musicians and singers who are very passionate about this type of work, and I'm happy to be here to represent them. I'm going to be singing one original and one song by Bob Marley. Oh, well, 2 of my children will be too. Anyway, I was telling them about the events this week, and I think it's important that we have representation from all age groups here. So I explained to my children what's happening. They're watching the news and they're abreast of my son. He said, I want to come. Am I too young to come? I said, no, you're not. So I'm happy that they're here.
From the
the bottomless pit. When my head was made strong by the hand of the Almighty, and we fought in this generation, oh, triumphantly. So won't you help to sing another song of freedom? It's all I ever had. Redemption song, redemption song, redemption song. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. Having no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it, but we've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing another song of freedom? It's all I ever had. Redemption song, redemption song, redemption song. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it, but we've got to fulfill the won't you help us sing, oh, another song of freedom? It's all I ever had. Redemption song, redemption song, redemption This next song I wrote, it's called Cry for Change. And I wrote this song when I first heard about Trayvon Martin. And I don't know why we hear about murders in our community, you know, so often. Whether it's people within our community killing one another, or whether it's like the cops killing people. We hear about it, and it bothered me that, you know, we hear it so much that we become numb. And this song really is just my cry for change. So I know we're here to talk about change and to talk about what we can do and to learn about how we can make a contribution. And I just want you to just look within, you know, to get prepared for our discussion we're going to have tonight.
An overwhelming theme that came through in the community policing surveys was a deep need for high-quality jobs in our communities. And generally, a lot of the negative interactions that are happening are in impoverished communities. So how can we work to build an intersectional movement where we're addressing issues with law enforcement, but also addressing the root causes of a lot of these issues that we're facing in our community, which is systemic poverty and institutional racism. So tonight's conversation will be centered around how we create that movement. I think that we've done a pretty good job on hitting the streets here in Buffalo. We've had activists from all across the city that are making their voices heard. As I said earlier, we had 75 leaders that went out and administered the surveys as well. So we know what the problems are. Now we want to help develop a blueprint on how we address them. So I'm very excited and delighted to introduce Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza. Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza is the founder and executive director of the Social Justice Learning Institute in Inglewood, California. Dr. Scorza is a U.S. Navy vet, Iraq War veteran, and obtained his Ph.D. in education from UCLA. That's pretty impressive. He also served as UC Regents from 2007 through 2009, and was a 2010 Education Pioneers Fellow, and is a 2013-14 Business Alliance for Local Living Economies Fellow. He has a BS in Liberal Studies with a concentration in Business Management from National University and a BA in Study of Religion. His expansive research and policy experience extends throughout the state, having passed policies that establish veteran service centers across U.S. campuses, prioritized $160 million for student services, improved sustainability in Inglewood schools, and expanded programs for boys and men of color throughout LA County. I think that alone deserves a round of applause. It's a statement that it can be done, regardless of where we rank on segregation in the nation, where we rank in poverty in the nation, I think this brother right here will actually help us develop a blueprint on how we get the job done. So I want you to join me in giving a huge round of applause for our featured guest speaker.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It is such a pleasure to be here in this phenomenal town of Buffalo. I've been here a few times. I got to tell you, every single time I come back, I feel like I'm at home. So thank you all so much for welcoming me here. Thank you, Frank Shelton from Buffalo, for having me here as well as the team members. I really worked to organize a phenomenal week for the community here in Buffalo. We're going to talk about a couple things tonight. You heard Frank Shelton talk about the historical and institutional racism that's existed in our societies throughout California and throughout the country and here in New York. And frankly, many of our communities continue to face the same conditions. But I want to do a couple things tonight before we get started. Well, first I'll do this. I'll tell you that we're going to have a conversation tonight that represents and recognizes that there are no silver bullets. So I got to go around and talk to some folk in the audience, and people said, look, I want answers. And I'll tell you tonight that my job is not to give you answers. It's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to help you ask more questions and come to a better understanding of the issues. Because I think when we assume that there are answers, we stop working to solve the problem, right? And so in many ways, our responsibility is to think strategically about how we do this, both through dialogue within community, but also through action. So, before we kick off, I've already asked some of the folk that are here to pass out a few index cards. You're going to get about 3 or 4. On one of those index cards, I want you to do a few things. So on one of the index cards, I want you to write down what you think opportunity and justice means. Okay? So you're going to do that on one of the index cards. Then you're going to hold the other 2 for a couple of additional exercises. One of the cards should be used for burning questions. So as you go on throughout the evening and something pops up in your mind, I want you to write it down, right? You don't have to, try and remember it. I want you to write it down and be ready to engage in that dialogue amongst this community here. So right now, we're going to take just a couple of minutes as the cards get passed out to figure what this idea of opportunity means, figure out what it means. So if you can, go ahead and begin writing. And if you need pens, I believe we have a few that are being passed out in the audience.
Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, so please, go ahead and take one of your cards, and you're going to write down your definition of opportunity. Write down what you think it means. Okay? Keep another card for your burning questions. And then we'll have other cards for other exercises. So it's going to be a pretty quick exercise. I'm going to give you about a minute. In about 30 seconds. Okay. So as you're wrapping up, I want you to go ahead and do me a favor and turn to your neighbor or your partner. And if it's someone that you did not come with, ideally that would be great. But turn to your neighbor or your partner. I want you to do 2 things. Introduce yourself, tell them where you're from, and then explain to them what your definition of opportunity is. What do you think it means for you? And as you listen to that definition, figure out if in that definition it aligns with what you see it as. So we're going to take about 3 minutes to do this exercise. You can begin now. So what's interesting about an exercise like this is that we often don't appreciate how simple conversations and powerful conversations can begin around shared values. And so let me get a couple of definitions or examples from pairs where your ideas of opportunity were alike. Please.
Okay, you want to hear what it is, or just...
Yeah, please just stand up and tell us what it is.
Opportunity to me, it was my prayer being, opportunity was my prayer being answered. And this presentation feels like my dreams, like opportunity, is coming true at last. And I met Ricky, and when she told me about her, you want to tell what yours is?
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Let's give a round of applause. Let me get another example. Yes, please.
I said opportunity means a chance to do something, able to get something done.
Fantastic.
Harlan said opportunity means to her like a door being open, to get something done, to do something.
And how many of y'all agree with those ideas as well?
Same there, we were the same one.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. And if you got to see it just now, as I saw it, about 90% of you raised your hands. See, our conversations and dialogue can start at a place where we, again, share values and begin to understand each other. And what we're going to be doing tonight is coming to a common understanding about these issues so that we can check in with ourselves and recognize how these issues influence us and how they're really based in a set of shared values. That in many ways, this is about caring for people, about learning how to treat each other with respect, about making sure that doors for opportunity are open. So, you got to hear a little bit about my background. Yes, I'm a U.S. Navy Iraq War veteran. I have a Ph.D. in education. I've traveled around the world. I've been to Israel and studied a whole bunch of stuff. But what you did not hear was that my father was on drugs. And I first met him at 6 years old in a halfway house. You did not hear that my mom and I and my sister moved around a lot, that she had a tumor when I was 9 years old, but she was 9 years old and I was 11, going on 12, and I had to give her DDAVP shots, her insulin shots, at 9 years old. Because when she had a tumor, they removed a piece of her brain, her hypothalamus, and it completely wrecked her hormonal system. What you did not hear is that I've lived in the back of my car. I've lived in when I was growing up, we lived in the back of our car. We've lived in a shelter, had to live with different family members, have moved around, been to dozens of schools. And what you do not see is that even though I was a U.S. Navy Iraq War veteran, I had a gun pulled on me 2 months ago by my own local PD. So when we talk about these issues, I want us to think about the complexity of these issues. I want us to think about the experiences and how they shape the way we show up in this world. So let's kick it off here. So we're talking tonight about opportunity, right? We just talked about it just now amongst our groups. And we're going to talk about what influences our opportunities. There are really opportunities, in many ways, are what dictate our choices. There are a number of things that go into what makes up an opportunity. There are dimensions of human development, our physical health, our cognitive development, our mental health, our socio-emotional support or skills go into the ways in which we're able to take advantage of opportunity. Our life force outcomes. And so when we talk about life force outcomes, we're thinking strategically about the age-related opportunities that you should have, should be given or be able to take advantage of. So that's stuff like being prepared for school upon arrival in kindergarten, or graduating from high school, or being able to go to college, or having stable full-time employment. We're also talking about the ecological and contextual factors, things in the environment that have an effect upon our ability to make effective choices. So that could be the neighborhood. It could be a pollution, a plant that's producing pollution, right in an urban or economically vulnerable space. See, it's all of these factors. All of these factors have influence on how we make our choices. So here's the thing. I start here because we often don't appreciate that we're only able to make choices based on the opportunities that are available to us. So if, for example, if there are no jobs in the neighborhood and you have to eat, you are probably going to do whatever it takes to ensure that you can feed yourself and feed your family. If our schools are in disrepair and they're underfunded, you're probably not going to be effectively prepared for college, hence, and more likely to be pushed out. So, situated choice is based on opportunity. It's hard to look at folks. This is an important concept to get very early on because it's easy to blame folk for their circumstances, right? You say, oh, you're in poverty. See, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's easy for us to make the assumption that it's someone's fault because they didn't work hard enough. But without looking at the ecological and contextual factors or the dimensions of human development, as well as the life course outcomes or opportunities one has, we can't fully account for it. And sometimes it's just plain old randomness. Sometimes you run into somebody that you met at a networking event, and because that person knew your dad, you were able to get access to that job. Right? So sometimes our choices are random. They're based on random circumstances and opportunities that come our way. We looked here, so I wanted to do an analysis of what it looked like here in Buffalo, and found that racial inequity disproportionately affects workers here locally. That the median wage for workers of color was $4 less than the median wage for white workers. Now, when you think about opportunity, again, you gotta say, well, how can someone afford to purchase a home and move into the middle class if on average they're making significantly less than their counterparts. Right? So you can decry someone being a renter all you want to, but if their job doesn't give them a strong enough wage, then they're probably not going to move to the middle class and move to stable housing environment, and is therefore subject to displacement. Also wanted to look at the way in which community was built. What you can see on this chart is that Buffalo has become increasingly diverse, right? The African American population has grown, the Latino population has grown, and the Asian and Pacific Islander population has grown tremendously in the past 4 or 5 years. Furthermore, what we find with this chart is that roughly 51% of jobs that are in this city require at least an associate's degree. So we'll talk about what some of the high school graduation rates look like. But if you think about opportunity and the ability to move forward in your own life, and recognize that in the workforce that's here in Buffalo, you need to have at least post-secondary education to get a decent wage. And then you take a look at Buffalo City schools and find that roughly 70% of students here graduate, or white students graduate, but only 50% of African American students graduate. Then you can imagine that white students more likely than not will be able to pursue post-secondary educational and/or career opportunities, whereas half of the black students that are here will not be able to do so. So we start with, I want to start with this data because I think it's really important for us to look at the data to begin to understand how narratives around these conversations get shaped. And then finally, when you look at inequity and the ways in which economic disparities and educational disparities are facilitated, it threatens everyone's economic prosperity. On average, your taxes go down, and this happened. We all felt it during the Great Recession, right? When the bankers were doing predatory lending and talking people into loans and doing reverse mortgages on seniors and convincing people to do ARMs or adjustable rate mortgages, they had a negative effect upon Main Street, is what we call it, a negative effect upon most of us in our lives. I think what this helps us understand is that at the end of the day, without improving conditions for all, we'll all be left behind. So, we're talking a bit about intergenerational disadvantage. So how does this play out over time? So, declining employment and earnings, that economic gap that we just talked about, as well as mass incarceration and the war on drugs, in a growth in disadvantaged families, young folk that do not get to graduate from high school, do not get to go to college or post-secondary institutions, leads to stagnant educational attainment. And what it often does, and we have the control for gender-specific effects as well, because this has a different effect upon men as it does on women or transgender communities as well. So we have to control for the role that gender plays in this, but when you control for it, you understand it, you can see that ultimately each of these ecological conditions and factors have an effect upon each other. What ends up happening is it transfers over to the next generation. So it's like saying, well, you know, you're young, you should be able to, again, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But if your parents were in a situation where they were economically vulnerable, by the way, I just want to pause here and say that I do not like using deficit analysis terms. So I don't use underserved, underprivileged, underachieving. I don't use poor. I don't use any of that language. So when I'm talking about economically vulnerable people, I'm talking about folk who don't have access to a prevailing wage. They're people who have to work hard to have a living wage. And so when you look at this relationship, and you look at the influence of this relationship, it translates into what we're going to see here. Now, this is a study that was done for California to evaluate, and yours is actually very similar to this, it's about 60%, but to evaluate what happens when you don't get to graduate from high school. So this is specifically for black males. In California, if you are a black male and you were no longer able to participate in your continuing education, and you did not graduate from high school, you have a 90% chance of being incarcerated. And I spoke with one of your reporters this morning and said that here in Buffalo it's about 60%. So think about that for a second. And we're actually going to think about that for a second with our bodies. So this is what I want everybody to do. Stand up for me. Okay. Now, this is the way it works, okay? This half of the audience graduated. Go ahead and have a seat. This half stays standing. Okay. Thank you. This half did not graduate. Okay? These first 3 rows, go ahead and have a seat for me. Out of an audience of this size, this many people went to prison. Now just look around. This many people went to prison. And they're predominantly African American. Go ahead and have a seat for me. Okay. Thank you. Now, for you who stood up for me, go ahead and stand up. We'll talk a bit more about this later, but I want to illustrate it because I think our bodies are powerful symbols, right? So, here we go. You all graduated, but only 30% of you had an opportunity, your African American males, for the sake of the example, 30% of you actually got to make it to college. So I want the first 4 rows to stay standing and the rest of you have a seat. By the way, for those of you who just sat down, we don't know what happened to you, okay? We don't know, you're called disconnected, we have no clue. This lapse where you can have a seat. Thank you. Okay, now of you who made it to college, bravo, we lift you up, you worked hard, you overcame challenges, woo-hoo, right? That's what we say, right? Okay, so you all made it to college, you're such an exception. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I need 8 of you to actually have a seat. There we go, thank you, perfect. You all, you can go ahead and seat. You all actually did not graduate college. Okay? 4 of you, no, 2 of you, do me a favor. You and you do me a favor and have a seat. Okay? You 2 did graduate college. Congratulations. Sweetheart, can you do me a favor and stay standing? You 2 go ahead and have a seat. Now I want you to bend down just a little, okay? Thank you. That's about the chance you have of graduating from graduate school, right? Thank you. Go ahead and see. Okay. Grad school, getting an advanced degree, getting a master's, getting a Ph.D. And we'll see some of those numbers a little bit. That's what's going on right now. So when we talk about communities being disaffected, we have to look at disadvantage in very different ways. So what does it look like in communities much like Oakland, South Los Angeles, quite possibly even here in Buffalo? We see this. We see concentrated disadvantage in pockets of community. And what we find is that this really begins to happen in the early 70s. We also find that when you concentrate disadvantage and economic vulnerability, you get higher degrees of violence, crime, lower rates of educational attainment, more use of drugs, and higher disinvestment. Because the resources to ensure that you have opportunities are not there. So then what happens is, the United States government says, hey y'all, we're going to do something about this. We're going to launch a war on this problem. We're going to go fight it with some weapons. Right? I've been to war, bless you. You want to declare a war on drugs, you're telling me you want to kill some stuff, right? So, here we go. We pass all of these policies across the country to essentially affect these communities where there is concentrated intergenerational disadvantage, and it leads to mass incarceration. Subsequently, the way we do that is by over-policing. So, it was a long way of getting around to the police issue, right? But this is important, because if you don't understand that it's through over-policing and aggressive police behavior, you won't understand why communities feel the way they do about police. What we further will not understand is that community members typically feel like they're not only being over-policed, but that they don't feel safe when the police are there. So they're like, wait a minute, darn if I do and darn if I don't. Right? So, and they typically don't feel like the police are effective when it comes to violent crime. So you have violence occurring, you have concentrated poverty, you have policies, federal and local and state government policies that are criminalizing people, but not appreciating what's actually going on. We'll get to some of that a little later. So, what happens? From 1972 to 2010, we see a 430% increase in rates of incarceration, equaling about 2.3 million people in prison for jail throughout the United States. Think about it. This is right around the time of sort of the fight. You can see a little bit later. There was a lot going on. There was the claims of reverse discrimination. There were fights around the Civil Rights Act, and historically, you began to see the Southern strategy play out, right, where there was coded racial appeals, you have dogmas of politics. You even see Donald Trump do it today. I mean, and others do it today, where they make these appeals about what the other looks like and what it means to be the other. And so they demonize and define the other. And then it becomes easy to pass laws to ensure that that other remains so. And this is historical incarceration looking at 1925 to 2012. So when you do this, you take people out of their home, you take all the folk that were over here, you just took them out of their home. So now in places and communities where there's concentrated disadvantage, you just exacerbated the problem. And often, one of the biggest reasons we were taking people out of home was not because you all were really out there committing violent crime, as the media portrayed. It was really because most of you were just using drugs. And so our social response to your drug abuse and use was to lock you up. Whereas today, Congress passed a bipartisan bill, right, to help take care of the heroin epidemic, the opioid epidemic, to ensure that there's mental health support and treatment and services for an entire population that did not look like you all. So, you also cannot have these conversations without talking about race. Now, how do we do this? We begin to evaluate what it takes to actually move a community forward. So I'm going to shift here because I think understanding the context allows us to start having some real conversations about how we transform conditions and outcomes in communities. So the first thing we have to acknowledge is that race, place, and gender matter. That the interaction of race, class, and gender mediates the impact of ecological environments on a person's life and profoundly influences their likelihood of achieving key opportunity outcomes across their life course. So any change we want to make, anything we want to do, has to take those into consideration. You cannot ignore them. There are gender and race-specific solutions to problems. We must also look at the relationship between systems and environments. That in order to shift these life course outcomes, a lot of the challenges associated with mass incarceration, and to keep communities of color, for example, boys and men of color, on track, we must focus on transforming the ecological environments in which they grow up. That is not just about telling them that they need to work hard. And by the way, I need to give significant credit to my colleagues. I didn't do this analysis. This is not my life course framework. This is the framework of some of my colleagues in Los Angeles and in the Bay Area who run a consulting firm called For Change Consulting. Arnold Chandler and Tia Martinez have done phenomenal work for one of our largest foundations and have really done some phenomenal analyses as it relates to these issues. Finally, not finally, number 3, you have to build resilience and promote healing. So when you live in conditions where there's concentrated disadvantage, you often face issues related to trauma. And we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. That because these systems have been around historically, they've done so much damage, not just to black and brown folk, but to white folk as well. Right? So what we've come to find is that when you live in a system where multiple individuals, where some individuals have power, some individuals have privilege and advantage, and others do not, it negatively impacts both. Now, how does it do that? Because ultimately, you have a group that's being traumatized, and then you have another group that's desensitized to the violence that's being perpetuated against another community. Right? And so we ultimately and to shut off some of our humanity to allow the stuff that we see happening to continue to happen. You stop seeing someone else as human. You stop feeling for that person. You lose empathy. I'm reading a book by Ian Lopez, and he talks, it's called Darkness of Politics. He talks about, and early in the book, how he was in South Africa, he was studying apartheid, he was looking at how coded racial appeals had an effect on their elections there. And he said that he got into his taxi, and his taxi could take him a couple of hours out. By the way, I've been to South Africa. The roads are long.
Can you slow down?
Sure can. Ian Lopez, right, was in South Africa. And he's traveling to this township, and he gets about 3 hours before the township, and there's no other taxi to take him. So this white African man decides that he'll go ahead and go the full way by the end of his day. He takes him all the way to the next township. It's about, again, 3 hours out. He gets to the township, and the African man says, okay, I'm sorry, I gotta stop about a mile or so away because I killed a kafir, which is the equivalent of a nigger in South Africa. And the local townspeople said, I do not want you to come here, and by the way, stay away. He killed him for poaching, right? He was poaching on his land. He says, stay away, because if you come back, you're probably going to incite racial violence. And people are probably going to kill you for killing their brother, right? So he says, the white African man did not go in. And in that moment, Ian Lopez said he realized that there are people that can be entirely capable of these tremendous acts of generosity and kindness, and simultaneously hate. That is not one or the other. Right? So when we talk about racism, when we talk about these issues related to race and concentrated disadvantage, it hurts us all. It robs us of our humanity. So we have to focus on healing and addressing trauma. We must also take an intergenerational approach. Look specifically at the historical trend lines and life course perspectives that suggest that all aspects of the work must be informed by an intergenerational perspective and practice. So you cannot effectively move forward in a community without having tackled the history of the people who came before you, and without effectively working with the folk who are coming in front of you or coming behind you, right? So if young folk don't work with elders in the community and vice versa, change does not occur. And then finally, we must take a cross-sector and cross-systems and cross-life-stage approach. In other words, we cannot work in silos. If you all work on health equity and food justice issues, and you all work on environmental justice and climate change, you two have to work together. Because at the end of the day, climate change will affect them, and not having good food will affect them. Because if the earth goes to tank, y'all don't have any food anyway, right? And that's sort of the point. We cannot work in these siloed places in order to have systems change. So, now we can transition to it. What are some approaches towards advancing opportunity and justice? I'm going to talk about 3 and share with you some examples that we've used in Los Angeles. Each of these 3 approaches are on multiple levels. One is on an individual level, the other is on a local level, and the other is on a regional and statewide level. And I did it geographically because I believe that place matters. But I'm going to start with the individual and talk about an initiative that focuses on interrupting those cycles of mass incarceration. My organization, the Social Justice Learning Institute, is a partner organization along with the Brotherhood Crusade in California, and we're supported by the California Community Foundation. You all have the Buffalo Community Foundation, right? It allows people to donate into a local nonprofit that essentially re-grants to the community based on the donor's will. Well, our foundation in Los Angeles said we understand that these are issues, we want to do something about it, and we'll fund organizations that have been highly effective in their communities to address these issues. And so we launched the Bloom Initiative back in 2012. Bloom stands for Building a Lifetime of Opportunities and Options Among Men. And it's targeted specifically to Black African American males between the ages of 14 and 18. We're expanding this year to the age of 12 to help ensure that they achieve educational outcomes or educational opportunity and career-based outcomes. And it specifically focuses on young men that were formerly incarcerated or currently on probation. So earlier when I had you all stand up and I showed you, based on your movement, what that looks like, that's this chart right here. It shows you, it's the next chart. This chart shows you how School suspensions and expulsions disproportionately affect communities of color, overwhelmingly affect men of color, predominantly African American men and Latino males, relative to their population. So they are often far underrepresented in the school population, but overrepresented in school discipline and zero tolerance policies. It's my understanding, and I read this on websites, that there was a zero tolerance crime policy that was adopted here in 2006. So you can imagine, when you do that, you have a negative effect, and we'll get to some of that a little bit later as well. This chart right here represents what I demonstrate with all of you here in this audience. So if you start with 109th graders, either African American or Latino, by the time they graduate from high school, and this is based on data in 2006, looking at the Latino and African American educational pipeline, only 53 will graduate, or 47 may be pushed out. 47 African Americans, 51 Latinos respectively. 31, so less than a third, might make it to college or post-secondary institution. Typically, out of the 23 that enroll in a community college, maybe 11 will graduate if they go to community college and they have significant support. If they go to a university, California, so if they go to California State University, when you add those numbers up between the community college and the state university, only 6 will actually graduate from a four-year university. If you go to the University of California, 2 may go, and maybe 2 will finish, specifically in the UC system. And the reason why that is the case is because in a place like UCLA or UC Berkeley, there is a concentration of resources. So there are often additional tutoring programs, there are often additional homeless student support programs. So you are able to get some of these outcomes in a place like the University of California, but guess what? It's still only 2 out of 100. So let's say you go a bit further, after you've gone to a state university, or you've gone to the University of California, you go to a private university, you might get 5 that go on and get a master's degree, and less than 1 or even less, 1 or less than 1 that actually get an advanced professional Ph.D. degree. So what we've come to realize in responding to these young men is that when we talk about zero tolerance policies and school discipline policies, we're often talking about discipline and deterrence policies. And what we're finding is that they have a positive effect upon recidivism. Negative effect upon recidivism. And so what that means is they facilitate recidivism. They do the exact opposite of what you want to do. You know those get straight programs, those boot camp programs, scare your child straight, and take them down to the jail and show them what it's going to be like? That stuff? Well, guess what it does? Makes them criminal. Does the exact opposite thing of what you wanted to do. They have found that, however, surveillance programs work fairly well. But beyond that, and these are control therapies, right? So control programs. But what they're finding is that therapeutic programs work far better than anything else. So focusing, for example, on restorative justice or skill building, counseling, and wraparound support services actually does the job. It does the trick. We're also finding that group counseling and group therapy, as well as mentoring programs, and I'll talk about what some of the mentoring programs are, have a significant positive effect upon reducing recidivism, as well as improving outcomes for families in general. What you find in here is that family counseling also does pretty well, but peer counseling typically doesn't. Why do you all think that is? Why do you think peer counseling often doesn't work? Somebody tell me? Yes?
Because when you set a child as an example to other children, now you make the children that are supposed to not be the examples feel like they don't match up.
That could be part of it. I will also add that what often happens is when a child gets in trouble, he's getting in trouble or she's getting in trouble with their friends. So you put them in a counseling session with their friends who are also getting in trouble. Guess what you're going to get? More trouble, right? So it typically doesn't work very well. Because if any of you all know anything about, like, I grew up watching Inglewood, when you out with your boys, you gotta be ready to put in work, right? You gotta be ready to put in work. So I think it's important to note what type of counseling is actually help. And I talk about these counselors because they're critical in thinking through the role of addressing trauma. And then finally, cognitive behavioral therapy, which gets folks to re-examine the way they see the world, matters. And so what this Bloom program relies upon is cognitive behavioral therapy. And we do this work with a number of youth, African American males that are system involved, black males in general, Latino males, middle school students, and mixed groups. So it can be a multi-ethnic or multiracial group as well, depending on the need of the community. And focus on these 4 areas. So building out an academic career pathway, strengthening one's identity, improving one's access to critical information through social justice youth development, teaching young folk how to understand their power and position in the world, and then providing socio-emotional support. Typically, I'll just be quick, typically operates as a class with a teacher who's in the class that runs the class itself with the curricula, and this work has helped us produce some significant changes in our young folk. The reason why I wanted to go there is because part of our conversation tonight is about healing, and part of it is talking about this concentrated disadvantage and poverty, but we got to look at the role that trauma plays in our lives, and I'll quickly move through some of this trauma literature. So trauma is often adversity, so it's out of the ordinary experiences that have a negative effect upon our level of functioning or identity. So assume this line right here is your identity. You're going about your day, do-do-do-do, and then you get hit by a car, right? That has an effect upon how you see yourself and see the world. It also has an effect upon your body. Well, that creates adversity. That traumatizes your psyche and also traumatizes your body. We've often been told that, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, that's not always true for some people, right? Sometimes you can survive, but you might have a broken leg and you can never walk again. Sometimes you get taken to the hospital and you die on a table. Sometimes you recover, but you're just never the same. You're able, now you know, hey, move real quick before that car comes, right? So you still have experiences related to that trauma. You try to get back to a normal experience, but it doesn't quite work. So resilience only takes us so far. When we talk about building resilience, it only takes us so far. So one of the things we work with our young folk to do is to move them towards thriving. So with this particular group of young men, as an individual strategy, we focus on something called post-traumatic growth, which is to move them beyond resilience and into an appreciation for the adversity that they're going through, and to figure out how to use that adversity to overcome future challenges. And it's not to advocate for suffering, but it's to help build strength in the midst of adversity and growth. It's akin to a cancer patient who's getting chemotherapy who says, hey, I understand what it means to have life now. I get it. I want to spend my time with the right people. I want to spend my time in the right way. I don't want to waste my money on that Louis Vuitton bag. Instead, I want to make sure that children are getting scholarships, right? It's that shift in our mindset that we make. And this framework around post-traumatic growth is a framework for healing that has to occur in communities where there's concentrated disadvantage. What happens ultimately is people have perceived changes in self. Begin to improve your relationships amongst your community, have changes in your life philosophy, I talked a bit about that, have changes in one's priorities. I'm going to go back to school, I'm going to quit smoking, I'm going to get my life together, and then often have enhanced spiritual beliefs. So begin to appreciate that there is greater meaning and purpose to life. It helps to reduce depression, alcohol, and substance abuse, and is positively correlated with hope, optimism, and the reduction of anxiety and other effects. Some of the ways we can do this individually in our own space, in our own homes, are to help our folk rethink about who they are, to build a stronger identity, to connect to your history. Where did you come from? Who are you? Why are you here? To have socio-emotional support outcomes, to have a loving and caring adult in the lives of our youth. To have healing circles where we're challenging bias. We had a community circle last night that was beginning that conversation. That actually is a facilitating strategy for post-traumatic growth. You can have writing groups, video groups, cooking groups, art groups, but importantly, one must get involved in civic life, because that's where your power for self-determination lies. And then finally, you can get professional counseling and challenge designations in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And this is really, really, really important, because if you're a parent or teacher and you're looking at your child and they're really hyperactive and you go, man, my child has ADHD. Well, actually, maybe they're not dealing with ADHD, and they may be dealing with some trauma. or some adverse childhood experiences, or other things that are not covered in a Western manual. It has a Eurocentric point of view that ultimately utilizes a deficit understanding of individuals to diagnose them with a problem when maybe there's something else that's going on. We have to deal with trauma. This helped our young folk improve their GPA. That's all this slide says. It gives you a bunch of extra details. When you hear more about it, I can share it with you. But for suffice it to say, that 78.5% of our students saw some grade improvement from year to year or over 2 years, which ultimately led to a 95% high school graduation rate and an 8% post-secondary college rate, and the rest of our young folk went and got gainful employment. Not only did that happen, but they began to organize. So they started showing up at school board meetings and said, we demand access to resources. And then they got in the community and helped to run a bond and raise $90 million for their schools. Right? These are students who weren't even going to be there. And they said, look, I know it's going to take years for this money to come in, but we're going to fight for that so that future generations can have an opportunity. So they have technology labs and have working facilities where when you turn on all the computers in the classroom, the power of the whole building doesn't shut off. Which, by the way, was happening in some of our buildings in England. So we couldn't even install computers. We didn't install a class of computers because it would shut off the power of the building. Because we had a state-of-the-art electrical system back in 1947. So, local strategies. You can also do some work around policing and oversight. Right? So the Dignity and Power Now, which is an organization in Los Angeles, was founded by Patrice Cullors, who's also one of the Black Lives Matter co-founders, was organizing because her brother was incarcerated and she wanted to do an art project. And after a year of doing this art project, people started coming together and saying, hey, we need to do something about mass incarceration. And so they started a coalition to end sheriff violence in Los Angeles jails, which focused on doing these things. So reducing and mitigating against mass incarceration, stopping jail expansion, and respecting the civil and human rights of incarcerated people, as well as implementing a civilian oversight board for LA County. They won their civilian oversight board. And they did that after 3 years when everyone said it would be impossible. And I think what's important to note here is that it is possible, right? That we don't have to make assumptions about who has more power than we do, that ultimately power lies in your hands. In the hands of our community members. Now, they do not have subpoena power yet, and they're supposed to work with the Inspector General to investigate police cases, but at least it allows them to have a starting place for a dialogue that often does not exist in multiple communities. And this is for our LA County. We have about 11 million people on the Los Angeles County basin. So we engage in some regional and statewide efforts. We have the Brother Son Selves Coalition, which is funded by the Liberty Hill Foundation, which is an organizing body in Los Angeles. And the Liberty Hill Foundation brought together 11 community-based organizations, of which our organization is one. By the way, we participated in a lot of this work as well. My organization participated in a lot of this. And we began to organize for something called the School Climate Bill of Rights. So a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, the Labor and Community Strategy Center in Los Angeles, which has something called the Bus Riders Union, which fights for more busing and public transit for economically vulnerable residents, got together and said, hey, their students were showing late to school and we're getting cited with truancy tickets. So imagine this, you show up late because something may have happened at home or the bus was late, you get a $250 ticket the first time, a $500 ticket the second time, a $1,000 ticket the third time, and before you know it, your 2 months of your pay is gone on tickets because your child showed up late. So truancy tickets would actually be counterproductive because the students would just stop showing up. And then you have to be called into court and you got to take off time because your student's not showing up for whatever the reason may be. And so they said, so their students riding on the bus were like, this is a major issue for us, so they decided to take it on. And in doing so, realized that it wasn't just about truancy tickets. Truancy tickets was just an example of how zero tolerance policies were having a negative effect upon our young folk. It was facilitating mass incarceration. So they said, oh no, the issue is not truancy tickets. The issue is suspending a kid because she does not listen to you as a teacher. Because when you take them out of the classroom, they lose instructional time. You basically send them home on vacation where they have nothing else to do but get in trouble. So you send them home, and it also facilitates higher rates of push-out. So it's called the push-out scenario. So this is where we get into this whole school-to-prison pipeline. So if you suspend a student, they are, one suspension doubles their chance of actually being incarcerated. One suspension. And so they realized this and said, we're going to do something about this. And then their campaign took hold, and then some of the foundations came together and said, hey, we want to support that. Let's bring larger community-based organizations together, of which ours is one. And then we began to organize. The School Conduct Bill of Rights was passed at LAUSD, which eliminated willful defiance. So you can't suspend kids simply because they're not taking up their habit or not listening to the teacher. You got to actually employ strategies to address what's going on. Broaden restorative justice programs, focus on bringing on health and wellness programs, focus on building out greater supports, greater academic supports so students can build competencies, etc. So we did a lot, and it focused on policing as well. So the intention was to mitigate against the punitive effects of police and to make sure that our young folk had other opportunities. So this is an example of a film, a brief PSA that our young folk did in response to Mike Brown as a part of the campaign work that we were doing with the Brothers and Sisters Coalition. And so I'll play this for you because I think this is instructive. And the reason why I think this is important is because it wasn't adults who were leading this work. It was our youth. So our young folk got in front and they made stuff happen. So I'll play this for you right now.
African American young men are disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system. And the fact that a lot of African American boys are painted with a broad brush, the excuse is given, well, there are these statistics out there that show that using that as an excuse to then see sons treated differently causes pain.
Don't shoot. I have a mother and a father.
Don't shoot because I have friends.
Don't shoot because I'm a young black talented male with dreams.
Don't shoot, I play sports. Don't shoot because I have a future. Don't shoot because I'm a college student. But please don't shoot because I ain't human. And my life matters.
We need to give every child, no matter what they look like, where they live, the chance to reach their full potential, because if we do, we'll start a different cycle. And this country will be richer and stronger for generations to come.
So, that was important. That last young man that you saw, actually, because of this work, I can meet President Obama and share a story with him and talk about how important it was for President Obama to take up these issues. And so you got to see a lot of young folk organized around the country, which led to the White House's initiative on improving conditions for boys and men of color. And I know I'm focusing on boys and men of color, and I'm doing that because they are disproportionately affected by a lot of the issues that we've talked about. And it's not to ignore that African American women and Latino community members are also affected. It's not to ignore that at all, but it's to acknowledge with a very solid example and some really straightforward data the challenges that we're facing. What's really, as well as, by the way, LGBT youth who overwhelmingly face issues of violence in our communities as well, and we don't ever talk about that. So I want to make sure that we're not ignoring the others out there, and this is not the Oppression Olympics, by the way. We're not ignoring people, right? But we have to acknowledge that there are other communities that also suffer as a result of these systems. So what's happened? A declining number of black youth suspended from LAUSD over the past 4 or 5 years. It's gone down. This is a significant fact. A declining number, so when you look at our trends from 2010 on, the number of young men that were being pushed out went down by almost half. The young men that were enrolled for a 5th year stayed roughly the same. They got a lot better with by 2014. And the black male graduation rate went down, but one of the reasons why, I'm gonna qualify this, one of the reasons why this went down is because more and more black students are leaving Los Angeles. So here's what's interesting about this. Even though these numbers are still declining, they're still fairly high relative to the population. So there's still a lot of work to do, but they are going down. And then we've begun to slowly see a steady increase in graduation rates among black males from 52 to 59%. So then our young folk, so this is where we get into, this is our regional local work. So then our young folks said, hey, we need to not only do this in LAUSD, but let's do it statewide. So we took on authoring an assembly bill that eliminated willful defiance throughout the entire state of California that passed a couple of years ago, which made it illegal to suspend a child simply because he or she chose not to listen in a classroom as well. Beyond that, a lot of organizations and coalitions came together to address mass incarceration in large. And so we passed Proposition 47. Our organization worked to organize with LA City Council and Los Angeles Unified School District to get them to endorse this proposition, which reclassified felonies, nonviolent felonies, into misdemeanors, which is a powerful, powerful thing. So in other words, you could not be locked up for 5 or 10 years simply because you stole something that was worth more than $500. If I steal your iPhone, I get a strike in the state of California. Right? So ridiculous reason to throw somebody to give them 5 years of prison time because they stole an iPhone. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I think in California we're like, look, we got to start coming to our senses because we also had a prison overcrowding issue. We're under a constitutional consent decree, and our governor was forced to let people out as well because the judges were like, this is not constitutional. You're like, this is wrong. So this is a brief video I'm going to play for you that talks a bit more about Proposition 47 and its effects, and why it's important, and what it's doing out of create second chances. That's really important because once you have something on your record, your chances for employment decline significantly, your chances for educational attainment decline significantly, etc. So Proposition 47 helps us mitigate against the effects of mass incarceration as well. And what we've been finding in LA is that there has been, because of this work now over the past 5 or 6 years, there's been a steady decline in numbers of youth that are being arrested and sent to our juvenile justice halls and our camps. And so this just gives you the trend data so that you can see what it looks like and how we're working to, again, address these challenges. So, what are some of our key takeaways? I think part of the reason we're having this conversation, and we didn't get too deep into community policing, because I think it's hard to have a conversation about community policing without understanding the context behind it and understanding the effects of it. But we'll have space for that conversation as well. Some of the key takeaways are to ensure that we have multi-tiered strategies that transform the material conditions of economically vulnerable communities of color, as well as ensuring that we're engaging in individual and institutional reform at the same time. We have to address the traumatic experiences that communities go through, period. You have to. There's just no way around that. It is often trauma is often the reason that student showed up in the class and is acting out in the first place. It's typically because of some traumatic experience. We must also use data in order to develop multiple strategies that are evidence-based, that help us focus on changing policies, etc., and ones that hold stakeholders accountable to achieving outcomes that improve our lives. We must also work in collaboration with other community-based organizations and agencies in order to maximize alignment through a collective impact process. In other words, no one organization can do it by itself. It just does not work. We have to find relationships with others, build upon those relationships, and engage in strategies that are going to transform our communities. And then finally, storytelling is critical. See, our ability to tell our stories allow us to humanize these issues, so continue to share. Continue to talk about what happened to Michael Brown. Continue to talk about what happened to the officers in Dallas. Somebody asked me, I got here yesterday, and they asked me, do you think by having these dialogues is going to incite violence? I said, no, I don't. I think you cannot mitigate against violence without the conversation. Without getting people in the same room to understand each other. Have them look each other in the eye and tell each other their stories so we can humanize people in front of each other. Because without that story, it's hard for folk to understand who we are, where we come from, why we think the way we do, why we exist in the world we do. So telling our stories is a critical strategy for healing that allows us to transform our communities. So, with that being said, I hope so far this has been helpful. But I definitely want us to engage in a critical dialogue. And so I hope we have a conversation. Question? Yes?
Hi, I'm India. So part of this striking to me is not only who is in this room, but who is absent from this room. And when information is valuable, we are missing a key part of the leadership of this city, elected officials, people who are able to influence policy. Where are they and how can we get them better engaged in this process?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, India. I'm so glad you pointed out who's not here. I don't know if there are any law enforcement officials here that are represented, but I think it's so important for us to have folk in the space in order to have an authentic and whole dialogue. I am not of the mindset that you've got to bring people to you. I am always of the mindset that you got to go to other people, right? And so for me, while it's fortunate to have your Madison Common Council member represented here, I think that's a powerful statement to have him here. I always, recognize that in organizing and in transforming communities, that you got to go to where people are. So you got to be in the churches, you got to be in the salons, you got to be in the grocery stores, go to the co-op, go down to the city council meeting where they are, and take the message to them. Because it's not like buying a Justin Bieber ticket, right? It's not something you're just going to want to wake up and do. It's easy to buy a Justin Bieber ticket, okay? Real easy. It's hard for me to understand, but it's real easy. Or Drake, or Chance the Rapper, or Kayla Moore, right? Like, you can get people to show up to those things, because those are things they want to do. Most people don't want to be here. Let's talk about this. So if they don't want to be here, take it to them. Make them have the conversation, right? I don't know if that helps.
It does.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, to India's point, my name is Mrs. Lingo, Massachusetts County Council member. But to India's point, she is absolutely right. And that was fast. But to India's point, she is absolutely right. It is striking to see who's not in the room today. And, I made a point to hear your presentation tonight. But at the same time, India does take her message to the city. India is and I don't mean for this to be the Indian show, but India really is a person who takes her message to the community. When we had the issue with the fruit belt, and she felt that it was necessary to stand and speak, she stood on her own. She was a one-woman barrier so that people would not take advantage of the residents' space and freedom to park in front of their houses. But my question, after I just gave India all of those accolades, India. But my question would be, as it relates to the students in the classroom, you talked about the punitive measures of the zero tolerance policies and how those have adverse effects on the students. My question to you would be then, what are some of the strategies that you maybe have implemented over in California that would allow us to make sure that we don't have to suspend students who are being dangerous to themselves and to other students who are bullying other students and disrupting the ability for other students to learn? What are some of those strategies, and where can we find some of those strategies so that when we do go back to the school systems, we do have things that we can implement that are effective measures?
Thank you so much for asking that question, Town Councilmember. I really appreciate that. And India, I do want to lift you up for the work that you do, and the work that Open Buffalo does throughout the entire community, as well as your partners that are here tonight. Yes, it's important, but I will acknowledge and I will submit to you that that when those council members are seeing you, they do see you as one person, right? So without 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000 voters, it's going to be really hard to hold them accountable. And I can say that because I'm also an elected official. I serve on the school board, right? I know back in Inglewood that my voters, when they show up, it matters. Okay? You got to turn out. And not only is it about showing up and saying, hey, you need to be in this conversation, but if you don't, we're going to use the power of the ballot and get rid of you. And I know that's a common sort of systemic response, but I think it's true. To get to your point about strategies, there are trainings for teachers to help address trauma or traumatic experiences. I believe that one of your partners here uses restorative justice. That has been rolled out in some of our schools in Los Angeles, and some of the schools that we work with very much so. We also use positive behavioral intervention support strategies, which allow teachers to use alternative pedagogical approaches, so teaching and learning approaches, to re-engage students in their class, to help take the time aside to address whatever it is they may be dealing with that day, and to listen with their hearts first. So to ask what may have happened before they got to school that led to their behavior, as opposed to saying, get out of my class, right? Go down to the dean's office, and I don't want to see you till you come back and apologize. Well, guess what? My dad just beat the crap out of me last time. I don't care about, 4th century art, What the hell does that have to do with me, I don't care about World War II, I'm not European, right? And I didn't worry about the country being black, my country being black, and I wasn't even born at the time, right? So I think a lot of times we don't even think about the implications of learning that take place in the classroom with some of our young folk and the strategies that have to be employed. I thank you for asking that question. I saw a hand in the back. Yes?
Yes. Thank you. My question is, I heard you mention accountability of elected officials to the people. And I'm curious, are there any aspects of these forms of governmental immunity, qualified immunities, that might play a role in insulating elected officials from accountability to the people?
Let me see if I'm understanding your question properly. Are you saying, does the institution protect the elected official from having to facilitate change? Is that?
I'm asking of the various forms of governmental immunities. Does that possibly insulate the various elected officials from accountability?
Thank you for asking that question. So, I'm not sure, okay. It's a great question. Because when you talk about governmental immunity, I don't necessarily think immunity in the sense that it protects elected officials from wrongdoing or negligence or anything like that. I think about it in the sense that, you're protecting taxpayers, right, from taking a hit on whatever it is that can break the bank and can mitigate against the fair delivery of city services, etc. So that's when I think about immunity. I think about the indemnification of government. Elected officials and others who sit on commissions or boards have a fiduciary responsibility to the institution to ensure that the institution is working and serving its people. And so I don't think they're insulated from that at all. I don't think there's any room whatsoever that protects an elected official from being held accountable to serving people. Because that's what it's there for, right? And so there are three things I know that people on boards and elected officials care about. One is making money. Care about making money for the institution or for whatever the agency is. They want to make money so that it looks good, it does well economically. Two, they want to look good. They love looking good. They just love it, right? And then three, they don't want to look bad. So if you're an organizer, you got to know these things. You got to know, okay, they care about making money. So anything that's going to hit the pocketbooks is something that they're probably going to resist. They care about looking good, so anything that makes them look bad is probably going to be something that they resist, right? And they care about looking bad. So guess what I have the power to do? Make you look terrible, right? If you don't do what it is that you need to do as someone who's there to represent me. And I think that's in many ways part of the power that residents and community members have that we want to acknowledge. Thank you. I saw, yes, please.
Hi, thanks so much for this presentation. It was awesome, really informative and inspiring. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the challenges of funding these strategies at scale. And I think LA is kind of an interesting context because you have in the city you have some major funders who are, funding a lot of work around education, but then simultaneously dodging taxes and that sort of thing. So we have like the Walton family, Eli Broad, for instance, spending millions of dollars on education, but then simultaneously funding something that attacked Prop 30, which raised taxes on the wealthy to pay for education. So, I'm giving that context, but I think just more broadly, generally about some of those dynamics would be awesome to hear.
Thank you for answering that question. Let me just say, not all funders are alike. Okay? To your point, LA is a very dynamic place. It's 88 cities within the LA basin. Eli Broad, the Waltons would not fund this work. It took us about 5 or 6 years to convince some foundations to fund it. And when they did, it was like $1,000 per student. When we looked at multifamily therapy, functional family therapy and multi-systemic therapy, when we looked at other strategies, they were funding those at like $7,000 per student, right, for like $400. So to help answer and contextualize your question, funding for this type of work is really limited because, to be frank with you, a lot of folk don't care about black boys. And so we have to work really, really, really hard to get people to care first and then to open up their pocketbooks. The Waltons and the Gates and the Broads, for example, are interested in dismantling public systems. I happen to believe that public systems are one of the few, or some of the few places where folks of color have opportunities. So once you divest from those public systems, right, then, and you privatize those systems, then what do we have left? Because we don't have wealth, we don't have a lot of wealth, right? Most of our wealth was wiped out since property was taken through the Freedmen's Bureau and then was defunded when the USDA didn't provide loans to black farmers and through the recent Great Recession, right? So most of the property that African Americans had in this land is gone. So, in thinking through that historically and recognizing, I think, your question, I would say that it's not easy. It's actually not easy. And there are others whose interest it is to ensure that our public systems are dismantled. And I would say those funders are not always simply interested in stuff like this. And that's not to decry funders. You need them. You got to work with them. But we're really clear about our values as well. So I would never take money from Broad. Like I just wouldn't do it. He's already declared war on public education. We're not friends. I saw a hand back there. Yes.
Hi. I heard you mention that 51% of the jobs by 2020 will require an associate's degree. And I was also wondering if you had any experience with or who can speak to the importance of exploring other means of meaningful employment opportunities, other sorts of professions that maybe don't necessarily require, yes, a degree, because as we know, they're really expensive anyhow.
I'm glad you asked that. I think the analysis that was done here was done by Policy Link, and they looked at the workforce data to figure out the types of jobs that are going to be available in the city of Buffalo in the future, right? And so it's really based on where your workforce trends are at and what it's suggesting that is needed in order to be, quote unquote, educated for the jobs of the future. Those jobs are, you're correct, not the only jobs that are available, right? But to be frank with you, I can tell you some of the jobs that are available in Los Angeles are to move into the trades and to work into construction, right? And you can make a pretty good living doing that. Or to really focused on being an entrepreneur and owning and possessing and starting your own business. And frankly, ownership or technically stewardship, but ownership is what creates the most financial stability in a community. So when you have people from that community who own the businesses that are in that community, you can keep most of your money in that community, and you see a lot of prosperity in that community as well. And so then you start maybe an engineering business, then you get to hire kids who have a record, right? Like that's how it has to work. But right now, those students will be hired because those businesses aren't even interested in exploring that opportunity for those types of students. And I think those are some of the challenges we're facing systemically that have to be addressed on a local level. So we're working with partner agencies that are focused on facilitating the local economy, and ownership and power within the local economy, even in the face of gentrification, is an important non-siloed issue to be a part of. Yes?
My question is on Prop 47. Do you have like numbers on how many people attempted and the success rates, or do they follow through, or?
Sure. I can give you one number.
Okay.
It's 100% success rate.
Oh.
And it was with my dad.
Okay.
So I happened to be organizing on Proposition 47, and it passed in November of 2014, I think. And then he picks the phone and calls me within a week and says, Dart, I'm getting released on a Proposition 47. I applied, I'm getting released. I'll be home by Thanksgiving. Right? So here I am out in the community organizing and doing this work, and I got to see my dad at Thanksgiving weekend within 2 weeks. Right? So I don't know the numbers for everyone else, but I know that the work that I did personally had a positive effect upon my family. Yes. Yes. Was there? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, yes.
So just so we make sure that we can hear everyone's questions in the back, we can continue to use the mics.
Yes, please. And I want to make sure we get folk that have not spoken as well. Please.
I'll switch over that. So I was very intrigued by what you said. You mentioned traumatic experience, or like healing from trauma. And you also said something that I know personally at home, but basically don't stop being human and having empathy. So not shutting down and saying people are different from me, so they must have even subconsciously thinking that they have being aware of that, that we shut down. So opening up and continuing to empathize. And I know on a personal level, I have learned an incredible amount over the past few years from my friends who are Black, just from listening to their stories. And even when that little voice comes up in my head that says, that can't be right, that can't be right. Just trying to silence that and trying to listen further, even when it's difficult, I've learned a lot on a personal level, and hope that I've done a tiny little bit, in my own little area to work against this problem. But my question with that is, when I move more towards, so I know for my own self, I can do this on a one-on-one basis, right? Like, as I meet people who are Black, as I have friendships, I can listen, I can hear those stories, and I can try to speak out when I have that courage, and I can try to do my own little bit to do that. But if I were to move on to a group level, as a white person, from one very trusted friend who's Black, he told me that I need to be very careful to not give the impression that I was a white woman coming into a community to save it, kind of like a white savior complex, which I know is a true thing, right? So that was great. I'm so glad he told me that, because I don't want to do that, But I do want to do what I can, I do want to do as much as I can. So if the best thing I can do is to listen to people's stories and change myself, that's great. But as a white woman, as a white person, what can I be aware of on a group level? What can I be aware of? What can I do, and how should I approach that, I guess is my question.
Thank you for asking that. So thank you for asking that question. I get asked that question often. And I'll say that first of all, there's a collective responsibility that we have to ensuring that opportunities are available for everyone, right? But I think as a white woman, and for white folk in general, what's important for white people is to challenge power and to acknowledge privilege. right? Privilege, in the context that I'm using it, is unearned advantage. So in other words, living, and so I have really good friends, a lot of really good friends that grew up in the Midwest or grew up in Seattle, and they have no clue about what it's like to live in those places. So the first thing you've done is take a step and say, look, I don't understand it, but I'm going to seek to understand. So good, you've got that part down. But now that you have that, the next step is to take it a bit further and say, all right, well, where are the places where I have advantage? And then in your place of employment, make sure you talk to HR and say, hey, hold on. How many black folk applied for this position and actually got it? Right? How many Latinos, how many LGBT folk have applied and you did not screen their resume? It's actually asking us, going a step further, and asking those tough questions of the people that you work with, of the people in your family, of our Republican dads and uncles, right? I had a guy, we were at Hollyhock, I was in Canada, and I had a guy tell me, he's a hotel developer from Florida, and he says to me, my dad told me, I grew up on a plantation in Alabama, and he said it was the free love movement and psychedelics and to liberate his mind. But he says to me, he says, I was raised, and I was told, don't go over there in the Appalachian Mountains because they'll eat you over there, right? Those people will eat you. He said, this is what I was told. He's like, don't ever be around black people, because there may be a few of them that are good, the ones that are in suits, they're fine, but the rest of them, make sure you lock your doors and grab your purse, right? So that's what he said he was told. He was taught in his household. So without actually challenging those ideas and calling them out for what they are, it's really hard to push back against racism. Because our privilege gives us power. And that's not to suggest that, for example, I don't have privilege. I am a male in a male-dominated society with a whole lot, right? But I know that in my organization or in other places that I go in, if someone says something really stupid about women or transgender people or others, then it's my responsibility to check them, right? In that space. No. Women are just as capable as I am. In fact, I know a whole lot more that would do this job 10 times better than I would, or you for that matter, right? That's our responsibility. Those of us who are in positions of privilege, and frankly, it doesn't matter what your race is, because we all at some level have privilege. Parents have privilege over adults, right? Black men in a high position have privilege over white women in working at the grocery store, right? I think we have to understand that, allow for the complexity, and then act in our strategic ways. And then when the opportunity comes up to engage in community and dialogue, to be present in places like this, and then take that presence and go help translate that into policy change. I happen to believe that our system, albeit not perfect, could work to our advantage if we all actually collectively work to make sure that happens. And so, just like you, 100 years ago, couldn't vote, right? Or 100 some odd years ago, couldn't vote. There were others that had to fight along your side and fight for you as well, right? So just because you're a woman doesn't mean you still don't face discrimination, but you still make 75% of the dollar what he makes, right? Or what I might make. So I think understanding that and situating ourselves in those realities is really, really important in order for us to challenge not only racial injustice, but privilege as well.
I want to be able to add. Locally, Harper, raise your hand. There's a local surge chapter that's here as well, showing up for racial justice, and they work specifically on helping white folks organize white folks and how they show up in spaces, especially Black Lives Matter, in light of what's going on in the rest of the country. So there is a group of allies that are having the same conversation and wrestling with these same issues that you brought up.
And be ready to withstand the criticism. Be ready to withstand being called a lover of black people, right? Or are you doing this for your black boyfriend or your black friend, right? I know in many white communities that your identity question and your loyalty to your race is also called into question. I did a conversation this morning with a reporter who was reporting on the Black Lives Matter issue, and she said, literally, there were thousands of comments which were like, oh, so you're one of those, right? I know these conversations take place, but we don't openly and honestly acknowledge them, we won't solve this issue. there's no truth, there can be no reconciliation.
So we have time for one more question. Okay, we have two. We do two more questions.
I'll be quick in my response, please.
I'm going to make that a little bit because I got to say that I believe I'm dreaming. I haven't been at a meeting, but I have felt so good as I am through this, and I've been advocating on this whole project, everything, for 37 years. Not just my son, who was maliciously prosecuted, but I've been advocating for Buffalo, other areas. And I just want to say, I want us all to stay together, and I'm going to be in touch. But would you be the lady that I have to contact tomorrow if I wanted to? And the information I need is on the brochure that was out there when they gave us. And thank you. And I thank you all. You've been so good.
Thank you.
I have felt this good in the 37 years that I've been doing this. So I say it because I'm 74, and I don't say this because I say but it's been a long, long journey, and I can go to sleep now. I just want to believe it's happening. I thank God for y'all.
Thank you. And let's thank both questions. One of you? Yes. We'll take it off. Go ahead, please.
I lived in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, which is a very privileged community in the sense of the inverse of what we think of as privilege. A lot of people who are considered mentally ill or drug addicted or homeless have a certain insight into changing the paradigm of the capitalist empire that we live in. And you talked about post-stress and things like this. So my question is a kind of like, and we also heard a Bob Marley song earlier today about redemption. So it's my understanding that the redemption of society, not to use religious language, but comes about from the bottom up. And so that the spiritual 1% is really at the base of the pyramid at the top. So I'm wondering if, like, how we can get some of the people, like in the Tenderloin, which is surrounded by Silicon Valley techies, not to assimilate into society, but to have the empire society assimilate into the roots of the dispossessed.
That's a really complex question, and thank you for asking it. I happen to believe that we all have just to help frame it a bit, frame our response to be quick, I happen to believe that we all have to have the spiritual capacity to live, to learn, to love, and to do that work, right? And so, in that regard, I think in the tech community specifically, you can that's a whole beast, right? We're starting to deal with it in Southern California, a place called Silicon Beach, which is in a community called Playa Vista, which is closer to the beach, just west of Culver City and Inglewood, which is where I'm from. And are finding that there's a lot of NIMBYism. You know, in my backyard, there's a lot of sort of demand and ownership. You know, there's a guy in Brooklyn who said, I came here and colonized this place first, right? I think the way we address those things is by continuing to utilize those platforms to speak out. Because even though those engineers are, and tech folk are creating these spaces for these conversations, these dialogues, it is shaping the way they see the world as well. And I think our voice is probably the most powerful tool we have to push back against an industry, or rather to utilize an industry to open up those conversations to transform it. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you, because it's a really complicated question, but it's certainly something worth exploring and thinking about. We have one final question.
I saw that you touched on the restorative justice practices in what you were showing. And we have had a history in our city of promises of the school board saying that they're going to integrate restorative justice practices in our schools, and then they pulled it back. And you know, I keep saying this to people, you know, in a city where we keep telling our kids that they're failing, We keep telling them that they're in lousy schools, that they're not working hard enough. We promise them things, we keep pulling it back. You're looking at a police force where, I mean, for young black kids, all they see in social media is that police want to either kill them or they want to attack them and hurt them. So here we are wondering why we're dealing with these kids that have some of these issues. But in terms of restorative justice practices, how can we make it clearer that these things are so important and the value of them and how we get to bring situations under control before they really, you know, they go crazy for no specific reason? How do we show people that this is something that really has great value to it?
You know, I thank you for that question. I would highly encourage that you do what we've done prior to police for generations. That you rely on the indigenous practices that we brought with us, right? When there was something going on in the community, right? And I know this is hard, I get it, but this is the era that I grew up in. My neighbors knew what was going on, and they went and got the neighbor, and we went and had some conversations about what needed to happen in that space, in that place. You have folk in the community, you have peacemakers, you have others that are working to bring individuals together to transform these conditions. And I would say rely heavily upon the community-centered practices that shape the culture on a school campus as well. Because the school is a microcosm of what happens in the broader space and the broader place. And so if you have restorative justice and peace circles outside of the school, in your block club, in your neighborhood, with the HOA later on, and there's a dispute with your neighbor and you model that behavior, that can go a long way for the youth in the community. It can go a long way. Now that does not take the responsibility off the school district to do what it's supposed to do, but what I've often found with an educational institution, especially when they have constrained budgets, is that if you can demonstrate that it works, they are more likely to adopt it. They're more likely to bring it in. So if you can show them this is what we need and this is what the community wants and this is how we're going to go about getting it, then they're more likely to move in that direction. And it makes it easier as well. So I think that was all we had for questions. I'd like to thank Open Buffalo.
Called on her before.
Oh, did I? We have to talk about it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Actually, it's a quick question. I actually just wanted to take it back to budgeting when you were talking about your program, because I'm really big in the school to prison pipeline. Do any of your funding actually come from the district that you are providing the services for, or is it all privately?
No, it does not come from the district. We have to fight, so part of the School Climate Bill of Rights work is to fight with the district to fund programs like this. The district does not fund programs like this. We have to fight with them to fund restorative justice, and fight with them to fund more counselors, and fight with them to fund this. So we're fighting with the institution to get the institution to move in this direction. But they're doing it because the work is being funded. And maybe that's a strategy for you as well. So get a coalition, go in there and kick some tail. Does that help answer your question? Okay. I saw one final hand over here. Yes.
Question.
I'm sorry. You might be over.
Are you using a certain curriculum
I am.
for the post-traumatic stress teaching?
Sure.
Can you share that? Is that something private or can it be shared?
I'm happy to share. Yeah. So it was actually curriculum developed as a result of my dissertation at UCLA. So it's what my graduate studies were all about.
Are you selling this?
Right. It's something I'm willing to share. Something that I'm willing to share. We work with school districts around the state of California to help them build their own curricula. We don't try to take our model and say it's going to work here. I don't think that ever really works. So what we do is we say, hey, look, this is what we've done. Would you like to do your own? And if you want to, we'll take you through a process so you can do it for yourself. So that way in 3 years, you don't need me. Right? Because I want these issues solved. Let me go work in Arkansas somewhere. You know what I mean? And Buffalo, y'all got it. You know what I mean? Something that's not, and this is just one thing I can share. There are things you can come to LA and show me, right? So I think that's sort of the goal.
Is teacher training, I'm sorry, but is teacher training a part of the curriculum?
Yes,
Is that to
we
the
provide
schools that you
teachers.
actually already have?
We do trainer training as well, that trains teachers on utilizing the curriculum in the classroom. And then we modify it based on the circumstances. So if it's, again, all Latino students, specific to that community. If it's African American students or whatever the case may be, if it's a multi-ethnic, multiracial group, we modify it according to those populations as well.
I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. You could be anywhere in Buffalo. Who knows, it'll be snowing next week. So you're sacrificing a beautiful Buffalo night to be here to participate in this very powerful conversation that we're having. Also to our community partners, New York State Civil Liberties Union, Partnership for the Public Good, Voice Buffalo, the Nonviolence Peace Center, Prisoners Are People Too, Citizen Action, Back to Basics, and Open Buffalo. So tonight is not the end. We have 3 more activities throughout the week. Tomorrow we will be hosting a documentary, The House I Live In. It's a documentary that was put together by the Drug Policy Alliance, and they'll be in to really talk about what the 40-year war on drugs looks like in Black and brown communities. Thursday, in partnership with the Civil Liberties Union, we'll be hosting a Know Your Rights training. I think that it's important to work on the systemic and the citywide policing changes, but also what can we do as a community to de-escalate in situations of potential violence with law enforcement. So we'll be hosting that discussion training on Thursday. And on Friday, we'll be holding a poetic justice jam session. And if you are an artist, if you're a spoken word artist, rap, hip hop, however you creatively express yourself, we're asking you to come out and to join us and really to create a safe space for healing, for conversation, and mostly empowerment.